The last original project Abram ever built on the new Yankee Workshop was a tap table. Not a grand heirloom chest, not a sweeping four-poster bed, not some final showpiece that would signal an ending. A tap table, a simple, modest piece of furniture, constructed in a 936-square-foot barn in Massachusetts in the fall of 2008 and broadcast on PBS the following year as Season 20, Episode 13. Nobody watching knew it was the last one. Norm didn't make a speech. He didn't look into the camera with misty eyes. He just finished the table, cleaned up, and walked out the workshop door the way he always did. Quietly, without ceremony. A year later, on October 16, 2009, WGBH Boston issued a press release. No further episodes of the new Yankee Workshop would be produced. 21 seasons, 235 completed projects, millions of viewers who tuned in every single week. Not for drama, not for conflict, not for competition, just to watch one man build something beautiful from a pile of wood. And it was over. No farewell special. No final episode with a ribbon tied around it. Just a press release and then silence. The official reason Norm gave was gracious and measured. "We've had a great run," he said, "built challenging projects, met wonderful woodworkers, and received loyal support from millions of viewers." That's it, that's all he offered. And for a lot of people that wasn't nearly enough of an answer. A show that was fully funded, still beloved, still pulling its audience, and the man at the center of it just decided he was done? So what actually happened? The real answer isn't dramatic. There's no network villain, no contract dispute, no behind-the-scenes blow-up. It's quieter than that, and honestly, more interesting. Because to understand why Abram walked away, you have to understand who built the show in the first place, what it actually cost to make it, and what 20 years of standing on a concrete floor doing real physical work does to a human body. The barn that started everything. In 1979, a carpenter from Woonsocket, Rhode Island, named Norman L. Abram took a construction job in the backyard of a television producer named Russell Morash. Morash needed a small barn built, a workshop essentially, on his property in suburban Boston. He'd heard Abram was skilled, efficient, and reliable. What he hadn't expected was that watching this particular carpenter work would give him an idea. Morash wasn't just any producer. By 1979, he had already created some of the most influential instructional television in American history. He'd directed Julia Child's The French Chef for WGBH in Boston, the show that essentially invented cooking television as a genre. He'd created The Victory Garden, a gardening show that became a PBS institution. Morash had a specific talent. He could watch someone do something with genuine mastery and figure out how to put a camera on it in a way that made millions of people want to try it themselves. So when he watched Abram build that barn, methodical, unhurried, precise, Morash started thinking. He had just begun producing a new program about home renovation. He invited Abram onto the show as a regular contributor. That show was This Old House, and it premiered in 1979 with host Bob Vila. From the very first season, Norm was there, not as the star, but as the craftsman in the background who actually knew how everything worked. Norm stayed. Vila eventually left in a contract dispute with WGBH in the late 1980s. By then, Abram had become so trusted, so central to what the show was, that he outlasted the original host. He became a fixture, not flashy, not self-promoting, just endlessly competent and quietly warm. And Morash kept watching him. The idea for the new Yankee Workshop came from a simple observation: Norm could build furniture, not assemble it from kits, actually design and construct furniture by hand from raw wood, using techniques that most people had never seen outside of a museum or an antique shop. Morash believed that if you put a camera in that barn, the same barn Norm had built in his backyard a decade earlier, and let Norm walk viewers through it project by project, people would watch. He was right. The new Yankee Workshop premiered on PBS on January 7, 1989. The first episode was a medicine cabinet. What made it different from everything else? You have to understand what American television looked like in January 1989 to appreciate what the new Yankee Workshop was. Home renovation was just starting to become a television genre. This Old House existed, but it was a renovation show. Big projects, multiple workers, months of filming. There was nothing quite like what Morash and Abram were doing. One man, one workshop, one complete project per episode, start to finish in 30 minutes. The format sounds simple because it was. Each episode, Norm would often begin by visiting a historic landmark, a colonial house, a museum, an antique dealer, to show viewers the original piece of furniture that would inspire the project. Then he'd return to the workshop and build it. Every cut, every joint, every finish. No shortcuts, no time lapses where the hard parts disappeared. No, here's one I prepared earlier. The work was real, and the pace was honest. The workshop itself was located on Morash's property, though the show was always framed to suggest it was Norm's own space. It was 936 square feet, with a famous sliding barn door that faced west. The floor was bare concrete. Along the walls, Morash and his production team had arranged every major woodworking tool you could imagine. A table saw at the center, a bandsaw and jointer along the north wall, a wide belt sander, a planer, a dedicated finishing room in the northeast corner. It was a professional operation built to look like a craftsman's personal shop, and it worked because Norm treated it exactly like one. What made Norm genuinely unusual as a television host was that he wasn't performing expertise. He had it. He'd been a working carpenter since the early 1970s. He graduated from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 1971 and went into construction. He wasn't an actor who learned woodworking for a role. He was a woodworker who happened to end up in front of a camera. That distinction came through in every episode, and viewers felt it even if they couldn't name exactly what they were responding to. By the mid-1990s, the show was earning Daytime Emmy nominations. In 1996, Norm was officially credited in the closing credits as Master Carpenter, a title that wasn't ceremonial. He'd earned it by building things that actually worked on camera in real time. The show's IMDb rating today sits at 9.01, which for an instructional woodworking program on public television is extraordinary. For context, most primetime network dramas from the same era don't come close. But none of that success was accidental, and none of it was cheap, at least not in the way that mattered most, the weight of one man's shoulders. Here's something the show never broadcast: how much of it depended entirely on one person doing everything. Most television productions have depth. A talk show has writers, producers, guest bookers, a host who shows up and reads from cards. A competition show has contestants, judges, producers who can swap out any element if something isn't working. The new Yankee Workshop had Norm. That's not an exaggeration or an oversimplification. It's the structural reality of what the show was. Norm designed the projects. Norm sourced the wood. Norm built the furniture. Norm explained every step to the camera while he was doing it. He was the writer, the performer, the craftsman, and the only element that couldn't be replaced. Russell Morash said it plainly after the show ended: the program could not continue without Norm. There was no version of the new Yankee Workshop that made sense with anyone else at that workbench. That's a remarkable thing to acknowledge about a television show, but it was demonstrably true. Unlike a cooking show where you can rotate hosts and the format survives, or a renovation show where the focus shifts from project to project, the new Yankee Workshop was built entirely around one man's specific body of knowledge and one man's specific hands. Every project plan was his. Every technique was his. The trust that millions of viewers had built over a decade wasn't transferable to a different host. And Norm was doing all of this while simultaneously remaining a regular fixture on this old house, which was still actively producing new seasons. In a given year, he might be working on both shows at once, managing the design and build of 13 new woodworking projects for the new Yankee Workshop, while also appearing on location for this old house renovations. The physical workload was not incidental to the job, it was the job. Consider what building furniture actually involves. You're moving lumber, boards that can weigh 40 or 50 pounds each, repeatedly. You're standing on concrete for hours at a stretch. You're operating a table saw, a jointer, a bandsaw, a wide belt sander. You're bending, crouching, reaching. You're doing precision finish work that requires a surgeon's steadiness, but with your whole body engaged, not just your hands. Professionals who do this for a living know that by their late 50s, the cumulative toll shows up. Grip strength declines, joint pain accumulates. The back that handled it at 35 handles it very differently at 55. Norm Abram was born on September 25, 1950. When the new Yankee Workshop ended in 2009, he was 58 years old. He had been building things on camera since 1979, 30 years. 20 of those years were as the sole engine of a show that required him to complete a new piece of furniture, from raw lumber to finished product, 13 times a season. He later said, and this is documented in his own words on the show's Wikipedia page, that the show's entire run was fully funded through underwriting and could have kept going. The money was there, the audience was there, the network support was there. He chose to stop. That choice deserves more examination than it usually gets. The decision nobody saw coming. When Norm Abram said he'd accomplished everything he wanted to do and wanted to spend more time with his family, a lot of people heard that as the standard celebrity exit line, the kind of polished nothing statement that public figures give when they don't want to say what actually happened. But there's real reason to take him at his word, and the word is worth taking more seriously than it sounds. Consider the structure of Season 21, which aired in 2009. That final season was unusual in a way that, in hindsight, reads like a quiet signal. No new projects were built. Instead, the season consisted entirely of rebroadcast episodes from Seasons 9 and 10, the 1997 and 1998 seasons, each prefaced by a newly recorded introduction from Norm. The season also had roughly twice the number of episodes as any previous season, 26 episodes instead of the usual 13. What that means, practically, is that production on new material had already stopped. Season 20, which aired in 2008, was the last season where original projects were actually constructed. Season 21 was a curtain call built from archive footage. Nobody announced this at the time. There was no final season press campaign, no retrospective special, no countdown. Viewers who didn't know what they were watching would have seen the new introductions from Norm and assumed the show was continuing normally. The decision to end had already been made by the time the final original project, that tap table, was completed in the fall of 2008. And the announcement didn't come until October 2009, well after the last new episode had already aired. That timeline suggests this wasn't a sudden decision. It was deliberate, planned, and private. Norm knew when he built that tap table that it was the last one, and he didn't tell anyone. When the announcement finally arrived, producer Russell Morash's statement in the press release was brief. Throughout the show's run, Norm has proven that he is one of the great craftsmen of our time. 14 words about 20 years of work. For a man who had built the show and hosted it in his own backyard, that restraint said a great deal. Morash wasn't spinning anything. He knew exactly why it was ending, and he respected the reason enough to say almost nothing. There was no acrimony, no contract fight, no creative disagreement, no network pressure. By all available accounts, everyone involved agreed that the decision belonged to Norm, and when Norm said he was done, he was done. The show ended the way it had always operated, without drama, without self-promotion, and without asking anyone for permission. That's a kind of integrity that doesn't show up on television very often, and it's worth pausing on what the fans said and what they didn't know. The fan reaction to the cancellation announcement in October 2009 was immediate and genuine. Online woodworking communities, which were already active by that point, registered real grief. Not the performative internet outrage that accompanies most cancellations, but the quieter kind of loss that comes when something reliable simply disappears. Woodworking forums and enthusiast boards filled with people remembering specific episodes, specific projects, specific moments where Norm's explanation of a particular joint or technique had clicked for them in their own shop. A significant number of those fans had built projects from the show. The new Yankee Workshop had sold measured drawings, detailed blueprints for each of the 235 projects, and the website continued selling them after the cancellation. Thousands of households across the country had furniture built from Norm's plans sitting in their living rooms, blanket chests, rocking chairs, Morris chairs, bookcases, pencil post beds. The show had put real objects into the physical world, and those objects outlasted the broadcast. What most viewers didn't fully appreciate, though, was what they had actually been watching. Every episode they were watching a man in his 50s perform precision physical labor with no safety net. On the new Yankee Workshop, there was no second take where someone else stepped in to do the difficult cuts. If Norm made a mistake, he had to account for it on camera. The furniture that ended each episode wasn't a prop. It was a functional piece built by one man in 30 minutes of screen time, over the course of a full production day. By season 18 or 19, that man was in his mid to late 50s working on a concrete floor and had been doing this specific job for 2 decades. Viewers saw the calm. They didn't see what the calm cost. Norm Abram was not a man who complained publicly. He never went on television to discuss fatigue or physical strain. In the years after the new Yankee Workshop ended, he continued appearing on This Old House for another 13 years, finally retiring from that program in May 2022. After 43 continuous years on the show, a one-hour PBS special called The House That Norm Built aired on October 3, 2022, surveying his entire career. Even then, his departure from This Old House was announced quietly, without fanfare, and without any of the retrospective weeping that usually accompanies a network farewell. He retired the same way he'd ended the new Yankee Workshop. He just stopped, the man who built the stage. It's impossible to tell the full story of the new Yankee Workshop without spending some time on the man behind it, because Russell Morash's contribution to the show, and to American instructional television as a whole, is almost impossible to overstate. Morash was born on February 11, 1936 in Boston, grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, and studied theater at Boston University before joining WGBH as a producer in the late 1950s. His father was a builder and a craftsman, which may explain why Morash spent so much of his career finding ways to put craft on television and make it compelling. He directed Julia Child's first television program, The French Chef, which premiered in 1963 and became the model for every cooking show that followed. He created The Victory Garden in 1975. He created This Old House in 1979. He created the new Yankee Workshop in 1989. 4 programs, each one a genre-defining institution, each one still drawing audiences today in ways that most people don't trace back to their origin. The workshop itself, the barn on Morash's property, was the same structure Norm had built in 1979, back when he was just a carpenter taking a job and Morash was just a producer who needed a workspace. The show's entire run, all 20 seasons of original content, took place in that building. The sliding barn door that viewers saw Norm walk through at the end of hundreds of episodes was not a set piece. It was a real door on a real barn that a real carpenter had built 40 years earlier. When you watch the show, you're watching a man walk through a door into a building he built with his own hands. To build more things with his own hands, there's a closed loop to that story that feels almost designed, except it wasn't designed at all. It just happened that way. Morash died in June 2024 at the age of 88. In his final years, he oversaw the upload of all new Yankee Workshop episodes to YouTube, announcing the project in a video posted on January 13, 2023. In that video, he gave a tour of the workshop, standing in the same barn where Norm had built 235 projects over 20 years. Near the end, he said, "We are thrilled to know that YouTube is now showing the new Yankee episodes to a whole new generation of people who may have somehow missed out the first time it was around, and now they're available anytime you tune to YouTube and want to watch a feast of woodworking. It's all there and it's all for you to enjoy, and I certainly hope you do." He made that video in his late 80s, standing in a barn talking to a camera, still genuinely excited about woodworking. That probably tells you everything you need to know about the people who made this show. The Second Life, and what it means. Here's the part Norm probably never anticipated when he ended the show in 2009. The new Yankee Workshop is more widely available now than it ever was during its original broadcast run. For several years after the cancellation, episodes were available through the new Yankee website and through a subscription service called This Old House Insider. Then, in September 2022, a licensing agreement between Morash Associates, WGBH, and This Old House Ventures expired, and the episodes disappeared from those platforms entirely. It looked, briefly, like the show might vanish from the accessible record. Then YouTube happened. Starting in January 2023, all 235 original new Yankee Workshop projects were uploaded to the show's official channel, free of charge, available to anyone in the world with an internet connection. Within weeks, a show that had last aired new episodes in 2009 was reaching audiences it had never had before. Not nostalgia viewers reliving their Saturday afternoons, but 25-year-olds who had just gotten interested in woodworking and were searching for instruction. Comment sections on episodes from 1994 began filling with people saying they'd never heard of the show before finding it that week, and that they'd already watched 30 episodes. That's not a small thing. The format Morash and Abram built One person, one project, clear instruction, no artifice, turns out to age remarkably well. Better, arguably, than almost any other instructional content from the same era. You can watch a 1991 episode of the new Yankee Workshop in 2026, and the woodworking is as valid as it was the day it was filmed. The joinery doesn't change. The wood doesn't change. The techniques Norm walked through for a blanket chest or a Morris chair or a rocking horse are exactly as useful today as they were 35 years ago. What changes is the audience's context for understanding what they're watching. A viewer who discovers Norm Abram on YouTube in 2026 isn't watching a television personality. They're watching a master craftsman at work, with the full benefit of knowing that he did this for 20 years and walked away on his own terms. That knowledge makes the calm in his voice carry different weight. The patience he showed explaining each step wasn't a performance. It was the actual texture of who he was, what walking away actually said. There's a pattern in American television history where beloved figures stay too long, where the last few seasons of a great show become a diminishment of what the great seasons were, because nobody had the discipline to call it finished. That's not a criticism. It's human. Things we love are hard to end, and the financial incentive to keep going usually outlasts a creative reason to. Norm Abram did something different. He ended the new Yankee Workshop while it was still good, while the audience was still there, while the funding was still in place. He ended it before anyone could point at a late season and say it had lost its edge, because he didn't give anyone the opportunity to say that. The last original project he built, the Tap Table, episode 13 of season 20, 2008, is the same quality as the first episode in 1989. The hand was steadier in 1989, but the standard was unchanged. When Norm said he'd accomplished everything he wanted to do, he wasn't offering a polite dodge. He was describing something real. Over 20 years, he had built 235 complete furniture projects on camera, a full range of American and colonial furniture, from the simplest medicine cabinet to complex multi-part pieces like the roll-top desk, the highboy, the gazebo. He had built a sailing boat on a woodworking show. He had built a functioning greenhouse. He had, by any reasonable measure, covered the discipline. There weren't meaningful gaps in what he'd demonstrated. The show was complete. That's not the kind of ending that gets a lot of credit because it doesn't have any of the ingredients that make ending a television show feel significant. There was no emotional final episode, no tearful goodbye, no tribute from former guests. There was just a press release in October 2009, and then repeat episodes until the broadcast stopped, and then silence, but the silence wasn't empty. The workshop still stands on Russell Morash's property, and according to accounts from people who knew both men, Norm still visited from time to time, not to film, not to perform, but simply to build. There's something in that detail that says everything the press release didn't. You stop doing the show. You don't stop being the person. The camera goes away and the craft remains exactly as it always was, in a 936-square-foot barn with a west-facing sliding door in suburban Massachusetts, where a man picks up a piece of wood and starts to work. So here's what I keep coming back to after spending time with this story. Norm Abram was given every incentive to keep going. The money, the platform, the audience, the institutional support of WGBH and PBS, and he chose to stop anyway. Not because he had to, because he decided he was done. And he trusted that decision enough to make it without a press tour, without a farewell season, without turning the ending into content. For a creator, that's one of the hardest things to do. And for a craftsman, it's entirely consistent with who he had been for 20 years. You don't add another coat of finish just because you have paint left. You stop when the piece is finished. The show is all on YouTube now. All 235 projects, free right now. If you've never watched the new Yankee Workshop, go find the Morris Chair episode from 1998, Season 10, Episode 6. Watch Norm build that chair from scratch. Pay attention not just to the technique, but to the way he explains it. Unhurried, clear, confident without being showy. That's the thing the show was actually selling, and that's the thing you can't replicate with a different host or a bigger budget or a newer format. Here's what I want to know from you. Is there a specific project you built that came directly from watching Norm? Or, if you're coming to the show fresh, what was the moment in your first episode where you understood why millions of people made this part of their Saturday? Leave it in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know. If this is the kind of storytelling you come here for, subscribe. There's more coming.